you focused on that technology piece, which I think is so interesting. So now I'm imagining you've gotten to know quite a bit about the learning technology space and what it means for education. You highlighted how that technology piece is a really key piece for certainly enabling, your original envision in higher ed, but it's the same thing that's true in corporations.
Yeah.
How have you found, like, what have you seen that things that need to change about learning technology in order to enable better learning inside organizations?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think one of the things that we at Learn to Win really quickly sort of gravitated towards was the value of data in learning tech, and just
Okay.
how, from our standpoint, there was a serious lack of insight from the data that was available in a lot of legacy tools. And I think, to be fair, I think a lot of early days of learning technology were really driven by like SCORM formats and
Yep.
things like that, as well as that's sort of on one side, and on the other side was sort of ERP, SIS, or HRIS systems, or things that um, would evolve into LMSs, but just sort of
Yep.
had these certain restrictions that came from being really just like enterprise. They were meant to be enterprise tools, not learning tools, right? They were
Sure.
for the
Yep.
benefit of the organization, not for the learner. And so that's
Yeah.
sort of like these two insights around, this was built for the company and not the learner, and this was built without the ability to collect any meaningful data around where are students getting stuck, what content is effective, ineffective, um, or where are the learning gaps that people could target and practice remediation on, and then and move past. And these are some of the things that we were seeing early on that um, they just weren't out there. And funny enough, it was some of our early customers in sports and military that helped us realize that, because they're the ones who were most interested in, like, okay, so I did this. How do I know if it worked? Which, it seems like an obvious
Sure.
question a lot of times,
Yeah.
but if you look at the tools that a lot of learning designers or CLOs or whatever were dealing with, it was the kinds of data they could get back was, well, they did it, or they didn't do it, or they got a
Yeah.
90%, or they got a fail, or it took them 22 minutes. And these things were not, you could maybe try to make them proxies for, was it worth doing this? What should I take from these analytics? But a lot of times they were just like, it was almost like they were meant to count something else, which was completion, basically, and
Yeah.
compliance.
Yeah. I mean, when like you mentioned before, since a lot of this stuff kind of evolved from existing HR tech or organizational tech,
Yeah,
it really is very process driven
yeah,
rather than outcome
yeah,
driven,
totally.
which is, yeah, an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, and no shade, right? For Because
Total.
people were
Yeah.
dealing
Totally.
with what they had, and like, when I look at the things that people were creating with an Articulate or something like that, these like really robust learning experiences, and then you look at what was possible to get on the back end of that, and it's just like there's such a mismatch with what
Yeah.
the formats out there allowed for. And I know that's something that's evolved with XAPI and things like that, but just thinking about the legacy of these things was still very much archaic, and not built around, I need data to make a decision. It's like learning was just a thing to do versus like a strategic
Yeah.
function, right? And I think that's sort of philosophically how we see learning in organizations, as using it as a strategic function, a thing that could be even like a leading indicator or a predictor of how someone might do, and not in a way that's like um, going to uh, going to like make predictions of like, this person can't do their job, and so bad things happen to them. It's more like, hey, if you're a manager, and we think there's a 30% chance that people don't know how to run an emergency procedure or something. Like, if you're on medical floor and there's 30% chance that not everybody knows how to run a code blue, you could just say like, hey, let's take 3 minutes at the beginning of the shift and just make sure that we cover code blue again. Or, here are the
Yeah.
emergency exits. Or here's what you do if your rudder isn't working, or I don't know, this sort of machine, you're mid surgery and this sort of thing just doesn't work anymore. What then should we do? And so we think there's a really good, there's a world in which learning and assessment is on the front end of these things and is actually a contributor
Yeah.
to getting out ahead of mistakes or just compromising situations.